Well, welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Up to my neck at the moment. I help run a big underwater photography competition called Underwater Photographer of the Year, and we announce the results next week, which means we judged it a month ago, but we're right in the middle of getting all the admin together. It's amazing how much needs to be put in place. So chasing entrants to finalize captions and then check and correct everything. So yeah, busy with that.
Oh God, as a dyslexic person, that sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. Just looking
Well,
at all
yeah,
that.
I think also everyone suffers blindness that when they see these things for the 100th time, you just
I
can't
bet.
spot the obvious mistakes anymore.
I bet. Well, I was going to start with something else, but seeing as you've mentioned that, I might as well ask you this. So, you mentioned you're one of the judges on this competition. I mean,
Yeah.
every photographer entering these will want to know, like, what are you looking for? Because you say you get like blindness because you're bombarded with all these pictures. What is it you're looking for to kind of elevate certain images for comps like this?
Well, that blindness was very much referring to the admin side of
Yeah,
reading
no.
text again and again. I mean, competition judge wise, for me, I sort of came up with with this contest, so I can't complain about the judging because I sort of decided it. For me, the absolute critical thing is the process. And honestly, I really believe with UPY, we have the process so spot on that actually I think you could swap the judges around and you get very, very similar results. And I think that comes about because what we do is, unlike a lot of competitions, certainly a lot of the underwater competitions, our three judges all meet together physically. We all look at one screen and we all look at every single entrant, and then through a number of rounds, cull those entrants down. And we simply ask the question, could that be a winner? And it's the time where you very much are judging with the responsibility of the competition first and foremost in your mind. So you're not bringing your own biases towards images. In fact, someone was asking me the other day, I posted something online saying I don't like this particular type of image. I think it was like, I don't like underwater photos where people have used artificial backgrounds, and
Right.
people were saying, oh, I better not enter that in the competition. And I was actually saying, well, actually, within the competition, we've awarded those pictures many times
Yeah.
because it's about recognizing excellence within all the branches of underwater photography, not about what I like or dislike. So I find it quite easy to judge for the sake of the competition rather than for the sake of myself.
You've got to take a step back, I suppose, like you're saying, and also if there's three of you in the room, I guess that's quite handy to bounce off each other. Like you might have a certain thought process, and then Tobias or Peter or whoever else is there is going to
Yeah.
say something as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think also within UPY, because we do it all face to face, every decision is up for debate. If someone's pushing something that everyone else is like, no way, they'll be told. But at the same time, I really believe that we always should have space in our winning collection for a shot that an individual judge loves, even if the other two are pretty cool on it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important that competitions should celebrate not the pictures that everyone says, yeah, that's good. We want pictures that someone really, really feels passionately about, because I think those are the pictures that tend to have the be a staying power. And although UPY now is only 9 years old in its modern form, it's sort of positioned itself as sort of the top underwater photography competition. It certainly gets the most entries. It's got, incredible images every year. And I think that we've built that reputation actually from the strength of the pictures we've awarded. Obviously,
Yeah.
it needs the talent of the photographers to enter them, but I think that our judging process has picked out a lot of pictures that have become incredibly iconic within the underwater photography world, including some of yours. And it's, I think, as
Quality.
a result, the strength of the winners the previous year makes it the competition everyone wants to enter the next year. And I think in a relatively short period of time, we've established ourselves very, very strongly. And I think having this face-to-face judging process, having this ability for each judge to have some proper ownership over the collection rather than being one of a big panel of judges, I think has created really strong images. So yeah. But right now, I just want to announce that we get it all done because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, no, I bet it's repetitive, and yeah, you've got to try and get there with all the work. Well, how did it all start for you? I don't think I've ever asked you this actually, but obviously, because like people see Alex Mustard, the UK underwater photographer. But where did it all start for you?
I guess a little like you, just with a love of the underwater world, and particularly a love of fish.
Yeah.
I was, incredibly fascinated by fish when I was young. My interest came more from sort of keeping tropical fish in aquariums more than any sort of field experience.
Yeah.
And by the time I was sort of 8 or 9, you could show me any page of any fish ID book and I could tell you what everything was, whether it was freshwater or marine, tropical or
Like a sponge at that
temperate.
age, aren't you?
Yeah, and I imagine I probably had better knowledge then, but I've kept that passion throughout my life, and it was that drove me actually to sort of wanting a career involved in that, and initially that led me to following a marine biology route. But I think in reality, what I do now is kind of more of what I felt that marine biology would be when I was a kid, which was going out into the field, seeing amazing things, and sharing my knowledge and my experiences with a wider audience. And I thought as a kid maybe that would be as a scientist, but as I've grown up, it's become being a photographer. But in reality, I kind of do the job that I kind of envisaged when I was young, which is that, going out there, seeing incredible things, recording them, understanding them, and sharing that with people.
We get to do all the fun stuff and none of the too bogged down academic stuff, really, being a underwater photographer. So it's sort of the best of it, I think.
Yeah, and I think that, imagery, whether it's still or moving picture imagery, is incredibly important for engaging people. And so, people maybe at first glance say, oh, you're an underwater photographer. That sounds like a bit of an easy and not particularly important type of role. I actually think that without that imagery, whether it's, moving pictures or still images, I think people wouldn't have the connections and wouldn't have that ability to connect with this underwater world that they wouldn't see with their own eyes.
No, definitely. Well, look at the Blue Planet 2 effect, like with the whole plastics and oceans. Like before that, people were somewhat aware of it, but it affected real change. So no, it's moving image and stills have got a very powerful message for a lot of people, for sure.
But I also just enjoy taking pictures of fish too. It's not all about high and mighty.
No, it's a simple pleasure. No, I'm addicted to that myself, so I can fully appreciate that. Who inspired you getting into it? Were there any influences when you were starting out?
Well, strangely, a little, but I mean, and lots of people along the way, hugely. But I think in those early years, it was incredibly difficult to come across that information.
Yeah.
And I think people forget about this. These days everything is there at your fingertips online. And when I was starting out, you'd have maybe monthly magazines where there'd be occasionally articles on people, and maybe you would find out about that person, but you couldn't go and visit their website or their Instagram account. So this kind of, the magazine particularly was an incredible window into that. And one of the first sort of competitions that I sort of stepped into that bigger world with was that Amateur Photographer magazine ran a annual competition, and included in that a young Amateur Photographer of the Year competition. And that was the first competition that that was of a high standard that I had success in. And I remember at those awards them telling me about, oh, do you know there's a Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition that you could enter? And I'd just never heard of these things, and I didn't know any other underwater photographers. The only contact I had in underwater photography was through the Ocean Optics, which was an underwater photography dealer back in those days. And that was kind of the only source of information. I didn't know that things like a British Society of Underwater Photographers existed, and I didn't know any other underwater photographers. So it's hard to think you could exist in such a bubble these days, because that information is 2 clicks away on any device in around the house. But back then it was actually, I kind of did a lot of stuff in isolation.
Yeah.
But the positive of that is I think it meant that I was very much self-taught on everything, and have really had to understand underwater photography. And underwater photography is a very technical discipline. And I think that having to be self-taught and having to learn everything myself and having to make every mistake myself has set me up very well for what I kind of spend most of my time doing these days, which is teaching others underwater photography. And I think having that really sort of thorough understanding meant that when I started writing articles, writing books, giving talks about underwater photography, I had a very fresh perspective. I wasn't simply regurgitating what someone else had told me. I was teaching what I'd learned for myself. And
that's not a bad thing, though.
valuable. Yeah. No, not at all. I think it's been very valuable.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I remember when I first got into it, I was just sort of just handed Martin Edge's book, which is basically the Bible for underwater photographers. And like, there you go, read that, and you're pretty much, pretty much be away. Which was a very useful book. I've probably still got it somewhere.
Mm.
But yeah, no, I do agree with you. I think it is good to sort of learn things your own way, and you come up with your own methods. And I think especially photography is an art form that is so objectional. So just because everyone else does it one way doesn't mean that's the right way. Everyone's going to have their own different techniques of doing things. Like for me personally, I'm quite happy to shoot in murky, backscatter filled water on high ISO with no flash, which I know like a lot of underwater photographers would have a heart attack if they were in those conditions. But I'm quite happy to do that. So I think, yeah, I agree with you. Kind of forge your own path and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I have to say though, learning from others is of course the more efficient route. But
Yeah,
you know, particularly because I never had any ambitions to be a photographer
no,
in anything more than a hobby, I was not particularly bothered about my progress. You know, I wanted to do marine science. You know, I went on, did my PhD, worked as a postdoc researcher. But sort of certainly through my teens and early 20s, I had no ambitions to be, you know, a good underwater photographer. It was just a really enjoyable hobby. And you know, I mean, I was trying to take nice pictures and I was having competition success, but it wasn't like I really didn't have any ambitions for this to become a career. So it was kind of, it was never very serious. And I think that allowed me to play with ideas photographically, to experiment and innovate. And ultimately that actually probably set me up much better for a career than if I'd been purely career focused from a very early start.
one thing I'll say about you, Alex, is you're probably one of the most humble nature photographers in the UK, because there's a lot of topside photographers who I won't name any names, but it doesn't take 5 minutes before they tell you what they are and what they've done and what they've achieved. Where I've always found with you, you've got to kind of tease out these amazing things that you've done, and you are very humble about these fantastic pictures that you take, and it's a quality I've always admired in you for those sort of things. I think you're
It's
a
probably
really
just
good
don't know me well enough, Jack.
Yeah, maybe it could be that as well.
No, I mean, yeah.
Go on. Sorry, what were you going to say?
You know, I think that I think that a lot of it's a difficult world because as a photographer, your product is yourself, and
Yeah.
if you're not advertising, promoting yourself, your business is suffering. I
Mm.
think the difficulty that photographers have is that if you have to spend all week telling everyone how great you are in order to make your business work, it can be hard to turn that off. And I think that's maybe why quite a lot of photographers end up, you know, as raving egomaniacs. It's because they've had to spend all their time telling everyone, you know, I'm the guy you should be using, I'm the girl you should be using.
Yeah.
It's usually not the female photographers who become the raving
No,
egomaniacs.
no, it's not. No, no.
But you know, I think that, and that is a part of it. And after a while, you maybe start believing it.
That's a very diplomatic way of putting that. Are there any aspects of the job that you don't like? Because I suppose everyone always says, you must get this all the time where people go, oh, you're so lucky and it's amazing what you do. But are there any aspects that are maybe not so favorable?
I don't. I mean, I love all my time. Yeah, I guess the challenge is balancing it with family life, and I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
and you know, it sounds like a, you know, very much a sort of, you know, a luxury problem, but actually, I think it's a real challenge because, you know, when I was starting out, I would have, you know, leapt at any opportunity to have more time in the field and have the opportunity to shoot. But once you become settled down, and particularly once, you know, now I'm a father, um, that really changes your perspective in that it's every day you're away from home is a big imposition on your relationships with your family. And in my case, you know, my wife works as well. And if I'm away from home, she has to restrict how many hours she can do in her job because
Yeah.
she needs to be around to look after our daughter, and that sort of thing. So I think that's the part I don't like, in that it's a constant battle, and that I think as a photographer you're always looking to maximize your opportunity, maximize your earning, maximize your time in the field. And indeed, when nature photographers gather together, they often show off about how many days away they've done in each year. And I would say the challenge that I'm trying to address now is maintaining my, you know, my outputs, maintaining my income while minimizing my time in the field. and obviously those are conflicting aspects, and I'm, trying to minimize it for fan members. And I would say that the thing I'm probably most proud of as a photographer in the last 5 years is being able to earn a good standard of living to provide for my family while shooting the things that I want and maintaining a very good work-life balance in terms of being around for my family, and also having the field time required to do high quality nature photography. And I'm by that, I measure that both in income and having the critical success in terms of having success in major competitions. And I think being able to find that balance without it, yes, my wife would be happier if I was home more, but I don't think I'm away an excessive amount of time. And we do balance it. And in fact, she has just come back from being in the British Virgin Islands for her job, and I've been manning the home the last week on my own. So we manage a good balance, I think, given the unusual nature of my job.
It's a juggling act, isn't it? And I think it's something that a lot of professionals are maybe reluctant to talk about, or they don't want to talk about. That it's maybe a symptom of social media that you only see the positives. People don't necessarily want to let you into the hardships and things that don't work so well, but it can be tough on family, on friends, and things like that. And I can sympathize with that. I remember, oh God, this must have been about 10 years ago. You came to Falmouth University when I was a student there, and you were giving a talk, and it was a very good talk. And I was sat in the front row. I can't remember if I've told you the story or not, but I was sat in the front row of a friend of mine, and we'd been out the night before, and he was just a little bit worse for wear. And you started talking, and all these amazing pictures were popping up, and we were absorbed by it. And then I turned over, and he had his head slumped on my shoulder, starting to snore. And you clocked him, but you ever the professional, you just carried on. And I elbowed him as hard as I could without trying to make any noise. He woke up and I went, "Get out. You can't be in the front row snoring when Alex Mustard is here." And he's sort of shuffled off. But I just think things like that, like I occasionally get people falling asleep in my talks, which kind of, it makes me smile a little bit. I'm not too annoyed by it. That's a very minor thing to moan about, but it's just little things like that.
Well, I think because I run a lot of workshops, and that's generally how I manage a lot of my year and a lot of my travel is by running underwater photography workshop trips. And nature photography is lots of people's hobby. Yeah. And I think underwater photography, particularly the sort of the scuba diving tropical side of it, is well suited to workshop trips, because underwater photographers don't want to dive like normal divers, and it's very hard to go diving somewhere on your own. Whereas if you can get a group of you together and hire a liveaboard or take over a resort, you can run everything to your tune, and you can make sure all the diving is ideal for photography, that people are given what they want. So as a result, I spend a lot of my travel time going and running these workshop trips and teaching. And I've always taken the attitude that despite being well known in my field, I'll always make sure on every trip, on every day, people get the impression that I'm there purely for them, not for myself.
Okay.
And I mean, I'll take pictures underwater, which is what we get to do compared to nature photographers on land, who often can't shoot next to their clients because we can't talk underwater. We can shoot at least.
Yeah.
But the rest of the day, I'm, I'm 100% focused on the group. And that means we often have some quite long days and late finishes. So I'm very used to people nodding off after they've done 3 or 4 dives, and we're talking in the evening and we're reviewing their pictures for the day or something in that. And I always joke that I stand up to give the talks, otherwise I'd be falling asleep too. Yeah. It's no problem. And if they're not falling asleep, they haven't been trying hard enough during the day. So
okay,
quite relaxed about people snoring in my talks.
That's the main thing then, isn't it?
I think one of my regulars calls me the anesthetist.
It's a good skill to have, I suppose.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any changes in underwater photography? I mean, you've obviously been doing it a while now. Do you think, like, compared to when you started to what it's like now, has underwater photography changed in any particular ways?
I think in lots of ways. Like everybody. I mean, since I started out shooting film cameras, there've been huge changes. I think the change to digital was massive for underwater photography for very simple reasons. The first was, on film we were limited to 36 pictures, and if you go on a scuba dive and can only take 36 pictures, it's quite a restriction. You can't obviously change film underwater. Also, most underwater photography is done with flash, and you can't see that flash when you take a picture, obviously. And when on film, you had no feedback on how your pictures were working until probably after the trip when you got the pictures developed. As soon as we switched over to digital and you had that instant review, it allowed you to finesse the quality of your pictures so much because your main light source suddenly now you could have feedback on and adjust and see. And I would say that's been a huge change in underwater photography. And then we've had some other massive equipment changes over the last decade, particularly since the digital revolution, one of which has been some really big changes in how development of underwater optics that I've been very involved with. Others have been real improvement in underwater lighting, particularly our flash photography underwater, just having more widely available, higher quality light. And those things have really transformed things. And you know, it's, you know, underwater photography is driven kind of by a keen sort of non-professional photography market who love the latest toys. So there's always been a lot of, you know, development in, if you can, as a manufacturer, if you can come up with kind of the new gizmo, everyone will buy it. And so it's a valuable, that drives a lot of progress in our field, which is really exciting, which never existed before. You know, things were very static for a long time, and we've had so much innovation and constant innovation, and it's very exciting beginning to utilize new equipment. And, you know, quite a lot of my successful competition shots have come about because of, you know, being lucky enough to be the person charged with, you know, field testing or developing this stuff and being able to get the shots first with it. And then, you know, the workshops are driven by teaching people how to use it. So, yeah, that's been, I think that's had lots of changes on that. I would also say that underwater photography has got a lot more people involved than it used to have. I think it's a lot easier to get into now. And I think with freediving also becoming popular and the cameras, digital cameras having the ability to take pictures underwater without flash, has also made underwater photography, you know, much more widely available, and people even with action cameras can create really beautiful stuff. And so it's also become a big sort of, you know, it's become much more of a mainstream activity, and it's been really great for engaging people in the underwater world. Because it's now easy. I think in the old days it was expensive and hard, and people tried it and didn't like it. And I think these days people can try it, like it, and it keeps them hooked and keeps them active and keeps them interactive with the underwater world.
It's incredible how quickly technology moves on, isn't it? I was looking back at some old footage the other day from the very first GoPro, and at the time I thought, oh, this is like Blue Planet, this is amazing. And looking at it now, I'm like, God, it looks like Vaseline has been smudged on the lens. It's awful. But, you know, it's that perspective then, and compared to now, technology does move on so quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah. And you know, underwater photographers have been slower to adopt the latest mirrorless cameras than land photographers, because a lot of the mirrorless cameras that have been produced in the last 3 or 4 years have been inferior underwater cameras to the SLRs. And we just sort of, I think this will be the year where the mirrorless cameras clearly become better underwater cameras than the SLR cameras. And I think that's going to be driving other changes as we're able to sort of harness some of the new technology and new capabilities of those cameras. So it's always on the go.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that was actually going to be one of my questions, whether you had a preference. Because the only thing stopping me going mirrorless, because I do like mirrorless cameras, is for the underwater side. Is so far I've not found one that marries both of them. Like, there are some mirrorless cameras which are pretty good topside, but they've just not translated to underwater. So you think that we're kind of coming to the precipice, do you, that we're kind of getting to that point?
I think for you it's a bit less of an issue, because you don't do as much classic scuba diving photography.
No.
And I think, I mean, without getting too boringly technical, one of the classic scuba diving photos is a photo where you go down on, you know, you're shooting an wide angle underwater picture. You set up a high contrast scene where you have, you know, silhouetted foreground and a bright background, because underwater it's a low contrast environment. That sort of high contrast scene will look good in a photo, and then you then flash fill that foreground. The problem with the mirrorless cameras is that when you look at that scene before you put the flash on it through an electronic viewfinder, it's very hard for that electronic viewfinder to be able to show you the detail in that silhouetted foreground and the detail in that bright surface of the ocean background. which is kind of such a fundamental underwater photo. And that's been a major frustration with the electronic viewfinders of the mirrorless cameras, is they can't show us one of our main types of underwater photos properly. Now, the electronic viewfinders are getting better and better with each generation. And actually, I've just come back from running trips in the Cayman Islands, where I was shooting one of the latest Sony cameras on that trip, just borrowed for review on that trip. And that camera was the first one that I've used with an electronic viewfinder that is really able to show that to a degree that I'm happy to shoot with. It's still not quite as nice as an optical viewfinder, but obviously an electronic viewfinder can do so many other things as well, that the small loss for that classic shot is worth it for the gains in being able to review my images without taking my eye off the viewfinder, to navigate menus, to do things like focus peaking and all those things through my main viewfinder. So that camera for me was kind of felt really like, and that was the Sony A7R5, the newest Sony. And the advance in electronic viewfinders is massive. The first mirrorless camera I reviewed for underwater photography was the Olympus OM. Well, it was the M5, the OMD M5, which was one of the very first kind of interchangeable lens but high quality mirrorless cameras. And actually Olympus arranged reviews for us to go to Malta and review those cameras. And that was sort of, I think, 12 years ago now. And I'm also quite proud that I think I was one of the certainly the first underwater photographer, but possibly one of the first photographers to be awarded in the wildlife photographer with a mirrorless shot, which was over 10 years ago now. So everyone's sort of, beating this drum, but, I've not been an anti-mirrorless person at any point. But no. The change from that camera with a 1 million dot electronic viewfinder to the latest Sony, which I tried with a 9 million dot electronic viewfinder. I mean, it's a different world. And yeah, it's not just the resolution, but the dynamic range that they can now show through those viewfinders is incredible. And I think that's really changed. So I think this will be the year that underwater photographers begin to leap into that world, or certainly there's now no reason to say those mirrorless cameras aren't as good as my SLR. And I think now you can begin to say they're better, because what's been happening since the last SLRs were made is that those mirrorless cameras have been not only improving their electronic viewfinders, but their sensors have been getting better, their autofocus has been getting better, and the jump onto them from the SLRs is quite impressive technologically. But Nikon certainly have got some serious catching up to do for underwater shooting. Canon could probably do with a little bit of catching up to get up to where the Sony is at the moment, but they certainly will, because there've been plenty of times over the last 20 years where one or the other has been lagging behind and they've leapfrogged back ahead, with the next generation.
Yeah, and it's always the same with camera companies, isn't it? Sort of like betting on a horse that the one will come through. Yeah. With obviously scuba diving is a huge part of your life, and photography is a huge part of your life. If you had to choose one, what would it be?
Photography for sure. I mean,
really? I'm surprised at that.
Well, no, but I wouldn't take photos on land. I mean, I'm not. You gave me the choice between photography.
That's true. Oh, yeah, that's sneaky, Alex. That's sneaky.
And because I only take pictures underwater, photography for me means underwater photography.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I would.
You got me on a technicality there.
Well, it wasn't my intention, but yeah, certainly. I like being in the water a great deal. I don't mind if it's snorkeling or scuba diving. I love taking photos in the ocean and don't mind what I need to do that. But it's the taking of the photos that drives me into the water, not anymore. At the end of last year, I did my 5,000th scuba dive, and I enjoy scuba diving greatly, but it's very much a tool to allow me to take photos if I'm scuba diving, to take photos, and I'll just as happily go and lie in a shallow river with you as I will go on a scuba dive. It's it's the ability to try and create nice pictures of that world that draws me in.
Yeah, no, I'm with you with that. Like I enjoy diving when I occasionally do it, but it's it's just a tool for the job, to be honest. I probably wouldn't dive just for me. I'd only go in with a camera unless it was something amazing, but then I'd want my camera. So yeah, I don't generally go.
I'm definitely the same on that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Have you got any kind of encounters that were etched into your memory for UK or abroad, really, when you've been? I mean, I know you've literally been all over the world, and you've been very lucky to see all kinds of incredible wildlife. But is there anything that that stands out?
Yes, of course. I think the way I sort of answer this type of question is I think it's very important as a photographer to be passionate about what you're shooting. And, I've been lucky enough to, photograph, orcas and blue whales and great white sharks and tiger sharks and, everything that, down to pygmy seahorses or whatever it is that, lives in the ocean. But if whatever I'm choosing to photograph, I will make sure that I am passionate about that. So if my next next opportunity in the ocean is going snorkeling down at Pendennis Point and I'm only going to photograph seaweeds, I'm going to be as excited about doing that and creating those images as I would be if going out to see a blue whale or going out to swim, with orcas or sharks or whatever it is. Because I think if you're not, you won't create those powerful images. And I think that passion is very important as a photographer. And you need to be excited about what you're shooting, wanting to tell whoever's going to see the pictures why you think this subject is amazing. And so I try not to dwell too much on the past, because I think it would mean that, if I'm going in 2 meters visibility to look for tiny sea slugs, I'll be dreaming about swimming in 30-meter visibility surrounded by 30-meter long blue whales. And I don't think that would mean that I would take good sea slug pictures. So I try to stay a little bit in the present on that and not dwell too much on the past. I think my favorite encounters are often driven by my favorite memories are often driven more by favorite pictures than experiences.
Yeah.
Although the experiences were something I was trying to pour into my imagery, it's the imagery that remains. It kind of becomes the indelible memory more so than the experience, because that was kind of my focus. So there's kind of this strange part of being a photographer where you have to be fully immersed in the encounter, so that passion flows into the imagery, but you're also strangely detached, because without so you're not going to have the technical wherewithal, particularly in underwater photography, to capture the picture properly. So you kind of you're in it and you're not in it. And I would say that during the trip, I suspect the passion for the subject flows, but in the moment, it's quite often the technical side that maybe comes to the fore.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Like, I think as well, you can find the beauty in anything if you look hard enough. And as you say, like, even if it is sea slugs at Pendennis, looking at all the minute detail and the colours and things like that, you can get those interesting images. So no, I sympathise with you there. So if someone wanted to get into underwater photography as a career, what would you advise? I mean, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, and I know you do bits at lots of camera clubs and universities, but what would you suggest?
I think the first thing I'd say is, if you're really passionate about it, it can work. And certainly when I was starting out and didn't, and been around for quite a while, because it was quite late on that I decided to do it as a career, I was told by pretty much everyone I know that it was impossible. And I think that I would encourage people to say that it's not impossible. It's not the route to earning loads and loads of money, and I think there's a real challenge to survive long enough to make it work, which I think you'd completely agree with, in that if you can survive, you get better known, you build up more material, you build up more experience, you build up more contacts, and it tends to work. So the first thing I'd say is it is worth it. It can work out. It can give you an incredible life and incredible opportunities. But it's unlikely to be, it's certainly not the way to a quick buck. I think that it's really important to approach the whole thing with a clear business sense. That doesn't mean that you need to know every last thing about running a company, but the catchphrase I always used for people is that the pro in going pro means that your life has got to be all around profit. And it's not simply about making some money, it's about making profit. And if something is going to cost you lots of money to do, or just because it's going to earn you money, doesn't mean it's a good decision. And so I spent a lot of my early years not doing what I wanted to do, but doing what I could do without spending much money, so that the small amounts of money I was earning were actually profit rather than income. And it's why to this day, I, run workshop trips in places where I'm paid by a travel agent to go somewhere and to teach a group in between the dives. They go off diving, and then in between dives I'm reviewing their images and teaching them stuff, because I then have left home. I've got the opportunity to make new images, and when I come back, I'm in profit already. And I think that attitude is really what allows it to work. So yeah, just focus your workings on profit. In terms of the photography side, I think if you're simply doing what other people are doing, then there's no room for you in the market. But if you are able to create images that are different, and they don't need to be better than what's out there, but if they're different, there will always be room for you in the market. And I think that that's a really important part of it. And I think it's why what you were saying earlier about, actually, learn from the established wisdom, but be very willing to follow your own antenna, because actually that will hold you in very good stead in terms of developing a career.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I would kind of say that anyone can make money from photography, but not everyone can make a living from photography. Is how I've always seen it. And in fact, I did a bit of a rant not too long ago actually about that. I routinely get asked, how do you take those pictures? People want to know exactly how I take them or exactly where I take them. And I used to kind of give bits away, and now I just get a little bit fed up because obviously it's taken me years to work these things out, and I just don't want to kind of just give it away on a silver platter, which might make me sound a bit like an arsehole, but at the end of the day, it's how I put food on the table, so I have to be a little bit more careful with that.
Yeah, and I'm very relaxed that I have plenty of images that my images are published all the time in lots of places.
Yeah,
but I'm very relaxed in also that I think a big part of my income comes also from helping others make images, and that's made possible by the quality of my work. And so I don't have any problem. 20 years ago, the photography world worked very nicely that you could be a photographer and you could just give your pictures to an agent, and that would give you the money to live on. The world has changed, as it has in every business, and you need to be adaptable as a photographer. And if now the market is very much dominated by the need to run tours and trips, and you're able to do that because of the quality of your work, then I see that as a perfectly acceptable way of earning a living from my photography. And if other things come in the future, because obviously the world is not going to stay the same, then I'll happily follow those other areas. I think it's all those earning opportunities are made possible by the quality of your work and the quality of what you've learned down the years. So I think that I see no problem in finding the income wherever it needs to be found.
No, you've got to be versatile. I wouldn't mind if people offered me money, but they don't. but yeah, no, I think be versatile. You have your fingers in lots of pies, and I mean, like, if you pick apart what is a photographer nowadays, like, you've got to be a public speaker, and you've got to be a teacher, and you've got to be a editor, and there's so many different sides to it. Like, I think the days are perhaps gone now where you can just go off, take pictures, and that's the end of it. I think you have got to multitask really in the profession now.
Yeah, and develop your skills in those areas. But I think also, it's I do the areas that suit me, my personality.
Yeah,
I enjoy teaching and helping people, so I've gravitated towards that area. I think other photographers are, particularly good at speaking, or they're very good at at selling prints and developing strong relationships with clients, or whatever. Those are aspects that don't suit me so well. So I do less of that in comparison. And I think you just got to be aware of what the opportunities are, and then do the ones that suit you in terms of your personality and what you enjoy doing. Because certainly I went into this job or into this career because of my passion for spending time with marine life and taking pictures. And I've always made decisions in my career that allow me to do that. I've been offered the chance to do this commercial shoot in a swimming pool for this sorts of money, and I'm just like, I just don't want to do that. I could do with I'd rather be going and seeing amazing marine life and going and seeing amazing spectacles, even if it means I earn less. I mean, I didn't choose to be an underwater photographer to go and shoot the stuff someone else wants me to shoot. I'll go and do what I want to shoot, which obviously isn't commercially the best decision, but choosing to be an underwater photographer isn't commercially the best decision. I want to
No.
go and, so I don't want to compromise the the main passion for it, which is going and exploring the underwater world and making those pictures and hopefully being able to share them with people if they're strong enough.
You could probably make twice the money doing half the work in something else. I always think.
Yeah, but you could if you went and worked, as in the city or whatever as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
I think having decided to be an underwater photographer, I want to do the underwater photography that interests me.
Yeah, for sure. And if you sorry, what was the last one? That's it. If there's anything you haven't, is there anything you haven't done yet then? Or is there a subject or a place that you've not, I mean, as you said, you've extensively traveled and you've seen a lot. So I'm going to kill those dogs. I don't know if you can hear them, but those little buggers keep barking. Is there anything that you've not done yet that you'd quite like to do or you quite fancy doing?
Yes, always. I mean, I think that, the great thing about the natural world is it's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'm as excited often going back to places as I am going to new places. And there's plenty of places I've been where I feel I have, not got close to tapping the full photographic potential from them. And there are plenty of places I've never been, a huge list. And I've never really done that much stuff with a lot of the great whales. I've not photographed humpbacks, which are by far the most photographed of the great whales. I mean, I've photographed them a little bit, but I've not done any sort of dedicated trips for them. So I would say that, yeah, I've got a huge list, a huge to-do list. But I'm also, I'm still in my 40s. I'd hate to feel I'd done it all by the time I was 50.
Yeah.
So my
it's a
intention
depressing
is,
thought, isn't it?
yeah. So I'm very happy that there were big things I've not done. And I've often chosen not to do them because others have done them. And I think you need to pick and choose your projects reasonably carefully. There's no individual needs to have a shot of everything.
No.
And if you've got specializations or someone else has done something very well or very extensively, there's not really going to be much space in the market for you to sell those pictures as well. I think so I'm very happy that there's lots of big things I've still got to do. I will slowly tick them off. And hopefully, I mean, there is, of course, the negative side of it all that, the oceans are under lots of pressure and things are vanishing and opportunities are going. But as we explore more, there also are new opportunities being found. People discover, if you go to this place at that time of year, you can see this incredible thing going on. So I would say that the to-do list grows faster than the extinguished list, even though the oceans are under incredible pressure.
You make a very good point there, actually, that about revisiting old locations. So I always concentrate on the next new thing. But yeah, if you've not been somewhere in a long time, particularly like with new equipment and new attitudes and new ways of looking at things, you can perhaps pick up new images.
Yeah, and your own photographic sensibilities change as well over time. The types of images I wanted to create 5-10 years ago, very different from the types of images I want to create now. And I'm sure in 5 years' time, they'll be different again. And so even when faced with exactly the same opportunity, and even when getting the most out of it to your own ability, actually just that natural, evolution in your own photographic goals means that the pictures you take when you revisit somewhere are always going to be slightly different.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so for sure. Before we go, I meant to ask you at the beginning, how's Zena? How's your sausage dog doing?
Yeah, she's well. She's 12 this month.
Wow, she's doing well.
Yeah, she's really well. She's upstairs. There's more sun in our sitting rooms on the middle floor. There's more sun in the sitting room than there is in my office. So she deserts me for the sun.
They're sun seekers, aren't they? My two love it. Any
belly to the air, belly to the ceiling on her back. Sun on the belly. She's very happy.
Yeah, you can hear them now. I don't know what the hell's going on there. They'll probably go down there and the place has been ransacked. So I'll double check on that in a second.
Yeah, I was hoping to meet up for this just to meet the new one.
Yeah, no, we'll have to. I'll come down. So you're still in Peterborough, aren't you? So I will.
Yes.
We'll have to come down. I'll give the dogs a walk and have another waffle. That'd be
Well,
good. Well, look, it's been a pleasure having you on, Alex. So thanks for coming on the pod.
Oh, no problem at all.